Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I realized recently that while I often allude to the practice of soul retrieval in my podcast, and it's something that I've written a bunch of articles about, I haven't actually created a dedicated podcast episode to something that is very much at the center of my shamanic practice. So I thought I would share a little bit about this, in my opinion, very cool type of shamanic work that is one of my absolute favorite things to do and share. So when I started out on my spiritual journey, I had a Reiki attunement that I feel like was like a gong going off over my head, waking up my spiritual questing. I'd always had a lot of energetic sensitivity, but it wasn't something that I was finding very useful. It was more like something that had me overstimulated to the point of dissociation. And so I was urgently seeking healing and transformation, and I'd gone the therapy route. And then I started connecting with some energetic techniques, in the first case Reiki, and things started to move really dynamically. Things got really vivid and alive, and I had a lot of somatic release associated with it, and my intuition started to really wake up and tune in. And the cool thing was that at that time I was working as an engineer, so I could afford to go to all the weekend workshops and take all the courses. And in studying, one of the things that I sort of stumbled into was a class on shamanism, and I spent a very memorable Saturday learning to go to my sacred garden and go to lower world and go to upper world, and followed that with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies version, which was even more extensive than the one-day class. And in the first workshop on shamanism, one of the things that was mentioned very briefly, very much in passing, was soul retrieval. And I just knew that I had to know more. So at the end, I went up to the instructor, which at the time was quite terrifying. I was painfully shy, and asked him for more information. And I actually ended up going and seeing his wife to receive my soul retrieval. And it was one of the more memorable experiences of my life. It was really cool during, but what I remember afterward is going outside and being under the night sky and feeling the before and after picture. So at this point I had, been certified to my Reiki master degree. I think it's a little funny to call it master, but that's the terminology. And learned a number of other energy healing styles, and I was playing with crystals and learning some divination practices, waving a pendulum around a lot, all that sort of thing. So my ability to sense transformation energy, in particular what was going on with my own energy, had been very well developed by the time I walked through the door for this, newest thing on my quest for wholeness and health and well-being and to really thrive in my life. And for me, just when everything quieted down and I was feeling into the before and the after, I just remember being in tears at how awesome it felt to be whole in a way that I'd never experienced before, because I had soul loss very early on, and there was just this new experience of getting to be me that was visceral and vivid and amazing and just so exciting and so transformational. And I know not everyone experiences various things as spectacularly. I've had people who have done a whole bunch of things in training with energy. They've done breath work or yoga or qigong, and then they get a Reiki attunement and would say, it's nice, I like it, I don't see what the big deal is. Whereas for me, that being the first thing that I really didn't have a reference point for that moved energy, it was really spectacular. And so Um, Likewise, for soul retrieval, at the point that I had soul retrieval, I'd done a lot of therapy, I'd done a lot of building my energy body, I'd done a lot of training my energetic sensitivity to point in the direction I wanted it to. So I know that not everyone has this really epic before and after feel. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with how effective the work is or isn't. It's a lot more about just how attuned people are to the intimacy of their own energy body. But for me, everything had stacked up in a really potent way, such that I came away from the experience feeling like if I only got to do one thing for someone, I wanted it to be this, because I feel that soul retrieval is life-changing in a single session. And one of the things that's really cool about it is you're sort of working below the level of the personality or the ego or the sense of self or the narrative or the stories. And I really like that because there's a whole lot in the world in the area of healing that really points people quite appropriately to their thinking mind and what they're doing with their thinking mind. But it's, in my experience, a very limited and finite realm of what's available to us for healing. And to be clear, the conscious thinking mind is capable of being noisy enough that it can pretty much, overwhelm the experience of just about anything else. But there's so much about the wisdom of the body and somatic release and a healthy energy body and the wholeness that's provided by soul retrieval that just don't really have a lot to do with someone's narrative. And my experience of soul retrieval is that by getting back our essence, we have this ability to go forward in the world in a much more solid way. And so what is this soul retrieval thing? So basically, it's one of those core shamanic practices. So if you start to look at all the shamanic cultures throughout the world, some version of soul retrieval is something that you find in all of them, just like you find power animals in all of them. They're these key concepts that transcend what continent or culture, the origin of the shamanic teachings. And it's this core practice that pretty much all these different cultures independently agreed were really important for wellness. Shamanic extraction healing, where you're pulling out energy that doesn't belong, is another really good example. And for soul retrieval, the idea is that events can happen that have us become separated from our energy. And if you look at a lot of the traditional ways of looking at it, there was a lot of thought that it was done on purpose. So, you could make spiritual warfare with another tribe and try to steal the spirit or the essence or a piece of it from their strongest warrior, which would make it easier to go to war with them. So when you look at kind of traditional approaches to soul retrieval, there can be a lot of trickery and, different approaches and sort of an adversarial relationship. In the modern era, a lot of it is the result of just kind of general human messiness. So when I do soul retrieval, there are sort of two places I'm looking. One of them is parts that have left for some reason. It could have been surviving a trauma. It could have been surviving math class in high school. It could have had to do with, I work with a lot of people who don't necessarily have a death wish, but neither do they have particularly a life wish. They're really ambivalent about their life and their experience of being on the planet. And when you are at war with yourself, what happens in kind of all different areas is one part of you will sort of take unilateral action that isn't arrived at by consensus. And if you unpack that in all kinds of different ways, you could find, a lot of wisdom for living, which is, get to consensus. If there are parts of you that are squabbling and dug in and forgot they're playing for the same team, you're going to have a lot of complexity. But one of the things is sometimes people who are having a hard time will end up kind of having part of them leave their body while part of them stays because they can't work out whether they want to be here or not. In other cases, drug, alcohol use, that can cause a lot of parts to go. And sometimes just even untrained psychic ability. People wander places in the dream time, and when they wake up, they don't know to bring themselves home to their body. So for a variety of different reasons, parts can go forth and not come back. in the case of childhood trauma, we're most vulnerable to soul loss as children. A lot of times the parts don't have a sense of space or time because that's very much anchored to the physical world and the human experience. And so they don't know that enough time has passed and the, unfortunate stepfather can never cause any more harm. So, there's lots of different reasons that the parts don't find their way back. Sometimes it's a contemporary issue like the ambivalence that I mentioned, and other times it's just not realizing that time has passed and a new decision can be made. And that's where I think it's really useful to have someone do an energetic intervention on your behalf to bring back your soul parts. I'm a huge fan of do-it-yourself. I have a whole academy with all kinds of information about ways that people can connect with their guides and cut cords and work with their ancestors and connect with their soul purpose and get rid of entities, lots and lots and lots of things that I'm such a fan of us being empowered to work on our behalf. I think it's also completely legit if people want to hire an expert. There are many, many aspects of life where, you might be able to figure out plumbing, but it's a lot more elegant to just have someone come in and be the expert and solve the problem and have it handled. And traditionally, that was sort of the way that humans have organized themselves, having an expert who you could go to when there was a problem. And I think it's interesting when we look at sort of tribal cultures that one of the things that people would be diagnosing for themselves was whether it was a physical problem, so they should go see the person in charge of physical healing in the tribe, who might or might not be the same person in charge of ceremony and spiritual healing, because the ailment of the soul or spirit was considered a completely valid thing, even if the body was physically intact. And of course, we know that there can be all those layers. If someone is really struggling in one area, it can ripple through the other layers. But I digress. Occupational hazard of having been doing this professionally for 25 years now. So moving right along. The other way that people can lose pieces of their essence is when someone else takes them, either accidentally or on purpose. But I would say that, 99% or more of what I see as far as soul parts ending up with other people, the vast, vast majority are accidental. A parent didn't realize they were grabbing a piece of their child's energy to fill a hole that had never been taken care of inside of them. I feel like in cultures where the per capita shamanic practitioner per person in the group that they were serving probably did better. They didn't get so behind on intergenerational soul retrieval. It was something that was being watched for and diagnosed and dealt with and handled kind of real time. Oh, you went through a trauma, let's get you the most up-to-date medical care, and then let's, get you some repair of anything that's happened on the energetic that was really disruptive. So it's really common for parents to have their own versions of soul loss, their own experiences that never got cleaned up and take from their children. It's also really common for people in romantic relationships to trade soul parts. And in a way, it sort of binds the relationship and makes it feel more stable, but both people are diminished. You can't actually use someone else's soul part. So it's kind of like putting a battery in that doesn't have any voltage in it, but you've slipped it into the battery slot. We can't use other people's energy. It's not our essence. And yet those holes and those openings can feel really painful. And I would argue that the challenge of being modern humans with all of the things that are available to us through capitalism, with hunter-gatherer biology, kind of sets us up to be addictive about various things, social media, shopping, sugar, fat, food in general. There are all these like reward circuits that go with things that have been monetized of people providing a quick hit. And I'm not against social media or brownies or, any of these things, but it's a little tricksy to have enough moderation for stability and well-being, because there is for sure a loop where we get the chemistry reward, but it's a hollow one. And so there can be more ennui and loneliness and disconnection and discontent and kind of coming off of that chemistry high. So I'm not implying that soul loss is the only thing that makes us insatiably hungry on some level. But if we're trying to address some version of sobriety or moderation or life balance, not having a hole in our energy and a space that can never be properly filled is sure going to give us a leg up on making healthy relationship decisions and food and movement and lifestyle and all of these different kind of things. If we have a drinking problem, it's a lot easier to address if there isn't an actual legitimate hole or gap in our energy. And so the soul retrieval process has the shamanic practitioner, and again, I really do believe that this is work that is best done by someone on behalf of another person. It's just so complicated, and even someone who's an expert in soul retrieval and can do it for other people is often supported by going to someone else for their soul retrieval, just because it's harder to see ourselves, and it's harder to negotiate and work with parts of ourselves that may not feel it's safe to come back. It's just a really elegant and effective way when you have somebody who's receiving and another person doing the work on their behalf. And if you're wanting to start to dip your toes in this, but you don't have the budget or the access for a shamanic practitioner who can do it on your behalf, you can certainly consider other things that are really helpful that produce some of the same results. So the kind of like calling yourself back, like learning to bring yourself into the body. A lot of people are very low-level dissociative. They tend to numb out their body or disconnect, and training yourself to be really genuinely present and aware of your body, aware of your emotions, aware of physical things that are going on with you, aware of, the taste of your food, all of those things are really, really supportive, because you could have a really good soul retrieval and still have a habit of tuning out the world or disconnecting. It's also really great, like if you're somebody who goes far in the dream time, to spend a minute drawing yourself back. For anyone who's done shamanic training, one of the things you learn isn't just to go into an altered state listening to the drum and send your awareness somewhere. You learn to bring your awareness all the way back. And people who haven't trained their psychic gifts but have a lot of them are just very vulnerable to going but not coming back. The analogy the guides like to use is it's like a cat's claws, where they can get hooked on a carpet because they have a stronger muscle to send their claws out and a weaker muscle to pull their claws back in, which is by design for what they're doing with their claws, but it makes house cats vulnerable to, getting their foot stuck in a rug or on a towel or something. And similarly, the default seems to be that people have an easier time going than coming back. And so training yourself to know how much you're in the present moment and use your intention and focus to bring yourself back, I think is really important, and just one of the kind of fundamental skills that is necessary for really thriving in the world as a psychic or energetically sensitive person. So there are definitely things you can do. You can also do shadow work. That's a really great thing. It mimics a lot of the benefits of soul retrieval when you kind of put your arms around all the parts of yourself. So anything that you were rejecting or pushing away. In extreme cases, this can also cause soul loss if you have a part that you're trying very hard to banish that, you've decided isn't okay. So that, making peace, even if you don't enjoy certain aspects of your experience, coming into more harmony with them can have a lot of the same benefits. So those are some great places to start. And of course, anything that keeps your energy moving, so things like Qigong and things like that are really helpful. So I don't want to leave anyone who it's just absolutely not in their budget to do a soul retrieval with me or with someone else who's very well qualified. This is skilled work, so I wouldn't encourage anyone to go to an amateur just because it'll cost less with someone who's just getting started. But I'm struck a little bit by the potential hypocrisy of that, because of course I, as a baby shamanic practitioner, once I learned that, I was like, hey, I have this really cool thing I want to try. I'll do it for free. And I had people take me up on it. And it was great. I learned a lot and got a lot of really good feedback. And it really validated my perception that this was something that I really, really, really wanted to do for other people. But, in the fullness of time, I do think that having someone who is very competent at this is a good idea. And I know that there's often a price tag attached to that. So I want to give you some other avenues that you can explore that will help with your overall well-being in some very potent ways. So those are some suggestions. And honestly, I wouldn't say that soul retrieval is necessarily a magic bullet that will solve all possible ills. I had my soul retrieval and I still spent a good bit of time being addicted to romantic love that was deeply problematic. I was just such a sucker for if I had a soul connection to the person and a heart connection and sexual attraction. I tried to work out all the other details, including, if they were lying to me, if they were, incredibly psychologically unhealthy, if they were treating me in ways that would never be okay with me, if the communication was terrible, all these things that were really impossible. I spent a lot of time, even after my soul retrieval, really, really, really trying to figure out how I could make it work with some really unqualified people. So we still have all the complexity and all the layers of our experience. And like I said, for some people, it really is that life-changing, like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I was very fortunate that one of the first soul retrievals I got to do, again, when I was like, okay, I learned this thing and I really want to share, was someone who had, done a lot of healthy things. She was in my classes. I was already teaching shamanic journey at that point, and this was like the next step. And, she came to me for one of my free soul retrievals. I'm learning to do this, full disclosure. And she ended up being able to wean herself off antidepressive medication. And it lasted long term. It wasn't like, she got euphoric and went cold turkey and there was, rises and falls of that. And of course, I've had plenty of people who, that was still a really good way to balance their biochemistry. So there's complexity in it. And for some people, it can be a spectacular missing piece that just gives them a really huge boost. I think if you've done a lot of other kinds of work, that benefit of getting a piece back when most of what you're dealing with is pretty healthy can be really, really wonderful. And, the guides can really help. Sometimes I feel like with people, I'm just kind of helping them to triage their life because it's going in a direction where future them is going to have more challenge based on all the choices that are being made now than current them. And it would be really great to, kind of get to a stable baseline. And what I would say about soul retrieval is, for some people, again, they feel a lot. Other people, there's just this greater solidness. So a situation that might have thrown you for a really big loop, 6 months later, you're like, I'm not thrilled about this, but wow, I'm not in a puddle on the floor feeling really devastated about this. So there's just this kind of inner resources that seem to be unlocked if you can bring all of your parts home. And in the modern messy world where we don't even learn to self-diagnose it, as an adult, we're expected to know when we need sleep, when we need water, when we need food, when we need, to take something to professional medical care, and which kind of medical care. Do I take it to my doctor next week, or do I wait and see how it goes, or do I need to be, calling 911 and getting a ride with lights and sirens to the emergency room? We learn, to diagnose, but one of the, I think, kind of glaring challenges for modern people, especially people who are sensitive to energy and impacted by that and aware of that, is we don't learn to self-diagnose the well-being of our energy body. We don't know when you're like, oh, wow, there's something intruding into my energy and I haven't been able to figure out how to get it back. I should go talk to someone. So I imagine, I'm making up a story, but I imagine a tribe that was organized around shamanism and who had an expert, one of the things people would be trained is when they should go talk to that individual about something being off. And I think it makes for a challenge because of all of the tendency with the self-help and the how much we like cognitive behavioral therapy instead of, somatic release or hypnosis or all these other kinds of therapy, that everything is so biased toward the thinking mind that we can end up really working on that part of ourselves instead of as much kind of having it chillax and seeing what else wants to move and what else could be called for healing. So personally, I love sharing soul retrieval. It's something that is still very much at the heart of my practice and still very much, if I only get to do one thing for someone, I want it to be this, because at the point that I started doing soul retrieval, I had done a lot of volunteer Reiki sessions and even paid Reiki sessions. I had a healing space and all these crystals that I would lay out on people, and I would do Reiki, and it was really cool. I was very good at it. I volunteered with people with HIV and, just had a lot of experiences. But what I found was that Reiki could be life-changing. It could also be like a really good massage where it replenished much depleted parts of someone. Their energy was depleted and it gets filled back up, and that, is very, very supportive. I'm a huge fan of energy healing. I have people who I reach out to for energy healing when, I have some stuckness around an emotion, around a physical ailment. So very powerful, very big fan of it. However, I definitely found that the energetic intervention of getting people whole before they went back into the world just really speaks to me in a deep way. And it is something that not everyone who does soul retrieval does it in a single session. There are lots of different modalities and lots of different approaches, and the guides that I work with and the approach I take is very comprehensive at the expense of, verbal processing and integration. I tend to send people away with like a lot to think about because I've just sort of fire hosed all the messages from the guides and moved the energy. Whereas, other practitioners, and this might be something that fits better for you, will do a couple of soul parts at a time and help you talk through them and help you understand the context by which they left. And I think that's great work too. Nothing against that. It's just that for me, I'm really interested in an opportunity for a dramatic change. I love the new destiny paths that open up after a soul retrieval. So I just wanted to share a little bit more about this practice that is so near and dear to my heart. I've been, of course, doing it for 25 years now, and I'm still really in love with it. And of course, I love when I get to have ongoing relationships with people. So it's wonderful if someone decides that I get to be a part of their journey and provide support and perspective and help them look at different perspective on life decisions and move old, stuck, stagnant energy. So shamanic healing across the board is also really interesting to me. And the more I get to know someone, the more a dynamic map I have of what they're dealing with and how to facilitate and how to work with them, which I think is super cool. But that core piece of work that is just getting your energy back and getting your parts back just seems like such a fundamentally important thing to me as far as all the complexity of being human. And one of the things that I've concluded after, hearing so many people's life stories is there's complexity. Certainly there are people with more and less privilege. There are things that are difficult on all different levels, but for everyone, there's complexity to this business of being human. It can be a lot at times. It can be really beautiful and rich and dynamic. And I think the modern era affords us a lot of really cool freedoms and opportunities, but it also affords us a lot of challenges that we don't get to have our past life mastery and the ancestral wisdom help us out with a lot, because, our brains interacting with smartphones isn't something that we could really draw on these other eras. One of my kind of reoccurring dreams is, I trying to make my smartphone do a thing like get directions or call someone. And I feel like it's my subconscious mind's bafflement about, staring at this box and pushing buttons and, what it works. It's kind of trying to work out like, what the heck? You interact with this thing and it accomplishes results in the world. Like, I don't understand. So, the way that we can, save for retirement, that wasn't available in past lives or to our ancestors for the most part, most of the time. So all of this is to say that, the business of being human can be really complicated. And I think having that wholeness, investing in anchoring that wholeness and then sustaining that wholeness. So if you've had a soul retrieval, but you've gone through some other traumatic events or potentially left some parts behind in a romantic relationship that ended or given them away in a romantic relationship that's ongoing, it's really good to bring them back. I've even seen people give soul parts to businesses they were really invested in and then get laid off and, have the I'm in this heart and soul sounds really good on paper, but now that you're not participating with it, and even while you were, you retaining your own essence with you and available to support you, I think is really important. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I just absolutely adore this practice. Obviously, I could talk about it a lot more, but I wanted to at least give the kind of basic version of something that is so central. And it's crazy that I'm coming up closer to 100 podcasts and I hadn't actually created a full episode on this yet. So I wanted to share a little bit more. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.